An example that comes up for me is offering to tie my 16-year-old's shoelaces every morning before school. Something that seems so easy on the surface, especially for a teenager. But I know it's a potential tipping point for her because of the fine motor skills it requires. So I offer to take it off her plate completely, and I do it for her. It's a moment in her day, but those moments add up. And it makes a really big difference in terms of her capacity and her ability to stay emotionally regulated and within her window of tolerance. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine. If you are a regular listener to this podcast at all, then you know that most of the time on this podcast, we talk about the brain. But you may have also heard me refer to at one time or another your child's unique neurobiology. And what I'm talking about, their unique neurobiology, I'm talking about more than just their brain. What I'm referring to there is their brain and their nervous system. This has direct relevance to the topic that we're going to dive into today, so I want to say just a few things about this before we actually dive into our topic. So the brain and the nervous system, you can't really separate the two. The brain is a part of the nervous system. It's not a separate entity. But I have found over the last dozen years or so, as my work with parents and professionals has evolved, that it's actually quite helpful to their learning to talk about the two separately. So there's a lot of overlap between the two. But one place that I see the most overlap is when we're talking about one's window of tolerance, or from a cognitive skills perspective, their emotional regulation skills. I have come to believe that this is one of the most underappreciated things that our brain and our nervous system does for us. That together, they help us emotionally regulate through disappointment and stressors and frustrations. They basically help us rise and fall with the stressors that life inevitably throws our way. They help us stay within our own unique window of tolerance. Now, if you're not familiar with the window of tolerance as a concept, it was originally developed by Dr. Dan Siegel to describe the optimal zone of arousal for a person to function in everyday life. So arousal meaning the level of physiological and emotional activation in our nervous system. When a person is operating within this zone, or their window of tolerance, they can effectively manage and they can cope with their emotions. They can rise and fall with those emotions. So what does this look like behaviorally? Well, if we are squarely in our window of tolerance, it means we're calm, we're alert, we can think clearly, we can engage with others, we can process and integrate all of the sensory information around us without our system becoming overwhelmed. We're able to learn, we can solve problems, and we can relate or be in relationship with others. So essentially, it means we feel safe at this physiological level and that our thinking brain is online. So it sounds lovely, doesn't it? It's, of course, where every person wants to be. It's way less stressful to live life within your window of tolerance. There is no motivation needed to stay in your window of tolerance. Now, when we're outside of our window of tolerance, there are behaviors that reflect that as well. So those are the defensive behaviors that we've talked about on this podcast, defending against life being just too much in one way or another in that moment. These are behaviors like irritability or sassiness or anxiety or anger, maybe panic. It could also be more of the withdrawal and shutting down behaviors like checking out or chronic exhaustion, fatigue, low motivation, social isolation. That is not where any of us want to be. It's very, very stressful. We're not choosing to be out of our window of tolerance ever. It's very unpleasant, but it happens with all of us. It happens to each and every one of us from time to time. So, how does this apply to our kids who have brains that work differently, who have fragile nervous systems? My guess is that you're already making some of these connections. If you have a child who lives with a neurobehavioral condition, this means their brain works differently and they have a fragile nervous system. Because their brain works differently, they are lagging behind in cognitive skills in comparison to where society expects them to be at their chronological age. Emotional regulation skills is a really common skill set that is challenging for these kids. It's not their fault. It's a result of their neurobehavioral condition. Now, they also have fragile nervous systems. What does this mean? It means that window of tolerance, just like we talked about, may be super, super narrow. So life throws what we'd consider a minor, really no big deal stressor their way, and they are instantly thrown into fight or flight, into a dysregulated state. Their capacity to manage life stressors, the most minor frustrations, the most minor disappointments, is just so narrow. So while, as I mentioned, we all find ourselves outside of our window of tolerance from time to time because it's just what it means to be human, the frequency by which this happens with kids like yours and mine is so much greater, right? The intensity of those defensive behaviors when it happens is so much greater. Now, there's an added layer to this that I just want to be sure to mention. Your child's window of tolerance may be narrow on a good day because of their unique neurobiology. But when they are in an environment that does not understand that they need to be accommodated for many, many things, this included, that this and their other lagging skills are about their differences, about lagging cognitive skills that need support, then their window of tolerance will narrow even more. And what this means is that those defensive behaviors become more entrenched and more intense the longer they are experiencing this level of chronic stress. The other layer to this is what we've talked about on this podcast before, and that's cognitive fatigue and how often this happens, how chronic it can be, how quickly it sets in for kids like yours and mine. We have an entire podcast episode dedicated to this topic. It's episode 21. So if you've not listened to that episode yet, I'd encourage you to do that once you're done with this one so that you can hear the full spiel on this topic. It's so important to be aware of and to understand. So I'll be sure to also list that episode in the show notes so you don't miss it. So when your child's brain is tired, their narrow window of tolerance becomes even more narrow. Punishment isn't going to increase their capacity, nor is reasoning with them or trying to get them to see your logic. What their brain needs is time to rest and time to recover, which means even more support, more accommodations are needed. All right, so speaking of accommodations, how do you accommodate this specific lagging skill, emotional regulation skills, or a narrow window of tolerance for everyday, seemingly small life stressors, disappointments, and frustrations? I'm guessing that's now where your mind is taking you next, as it should. So the first essential piece, which I've said many, many times on this podcast, but it's so easy for us to forget, myself included, is that we have to slow ourselves down. We have to be able to get some space between those defensive behaviors that our child is experiencing and our really normal, understandable, visceral reaction so that we have the ability to see the situation for what it is. This is about their lagging emotional regulation skills, their fragile nervous system, getting easily tipped over into dysregulation, their narrow window of tolerance, and the added layer of them navigating a world that is not set up for them. Making that initial shift in our mind, it shifts our energy. It softens us. It invites curiosity in. It helps us be more empathetic in the midst of their great distress, this seemingly small thing that is just so distressing to them. The next step, really it's a simultaneous step, is to manage your own internal arousal, that energetic level within you. What's happening within you? Are you firmly within your own window of tolerance? Are you grounded in your body? Are you regulated? What might you need to do in that moment to soothe your own nervous system? This is always an important step, but when we're talking about how to support and build lagging emotional regulation skills specifically in our complex kids who struggle, it's truly everything. And why is that? It's everything because when we understand that emotional regulation skills are not built in isolation, but instead are cultivated in relationship with another regulated person, that's us. That needs to be us, right? So let me say that again because it's super important. Emotional regulation skills are strengthened through co-regulation, which is connection with another regulated person. Being in connection with a regulated person steadies and strengthens our own nervous system, including, most especially, when it comes to a child who is so fragile in this way. What does not work to build their emotional regulation skills is to isolate them, so telling them to go calm down on their own, or to talk at them, or try to reason with them, or get them to see your logic. Remember, if they are outside their window of tolerance because of how much distress they are experiencing, they are also out of their thinking brain. They cannot reason, logic, listen, reflect when their thinking brain is offline. They don't have access to the cognitive skills that are required to do all of those things. So supporting their fragile nervous system with regulated presence is first and foremost. That is what helps build those emotional regulation skills, which are the very thing getting in their way, the thing that's making the situation so difficult for them and for you. Other accommodations to consider. One is to really try to get clarity on the patterns. Where does your child experience disappointment or frustration, and how can you proactively plan to reduce that even just a little bit? For example, giving them lots of information about what's coming next and what to expect so that they don't experience what I call this whiplash effect. So say they're going to go to a birthday party. They've been invited to a birthday party. They're super excited about it. And you're talking to them way in advance of the party about how it might feel for them to watch this friend, the birthday friend, get all the attention and open gifts, right? You're helping them anticipate the disappointment that might come with this. And you're helping them regulate through that, manage, work through that to prepare so that maybe it doesn't hit them as hard and challenge their window of tolerance so much in the moment. Another accommodation, making sure that they're well-fed and hydrated, especially when you know they're about to enter into a situation that will test their window of tolerance. It may be really making sure you're fully accommodating them with tasks that on the surface might seem easy for their age, right? At this age, they for sure should be able to do this. But when you scratch the surface just a little bit, you can see that this one minor thing is what might throw them into dysregulation. So an example that comes up for me is offering to tie my 16-year-old's shoelaces every morning before school. Something that seems so easy on the surface, especially for a teenager. But I know it's a potential tipping point for her because of the fine motor skills it requires. So I offer to take it off her plate completely, and I do it for her. It's a moment in her day, but those moments add up. And it makes a really big difference in terms of her capacity and her ability to stay emotionally regulated and within her window of tolerance. And let's not forget, as an accommodation, the power of playfulness and humor. When you see your child's emotional regulation skills getting the best of them, and you can use silliness or humor or play to help them come back into their window of tolerance, it can be like magic. It is such a great, great tool if you're able to access it. Those are just a few ideas that I hope are helpful to you in getting you started in thinking about your own child's unique neurobiology and how it impacts their ability to emotionally regulate throughout their day, looking for the signs that their likely very narrow window of tolerance is getting challenged beyond their capacity, and how can you support them in building this specific skill set. Now, our next episode, we are going to continue on this topic. It's going to be a part 2, but we are going to talk about our own windows of tolerance as parents, as professionals who are in the role of supporting these very complex and fragile kids. It's such an important piece of this larger puzzle. So I'm really excited to cover that in our next episode. So stay tuned for part 2. And until then, thanks for listening and take care. Hey, I was hoping I could ask for a really quick favor before we say goodbye. If you enjoy this podcast and you find the information that I have to share valuable to you as a parent or a provider, I would really appreciate if you took just a few minutes to provide this podcast with a 5-star review and a quick comment with how this information has positively impacted you. It is the number one way for me to reach more parents like you and I, that could really use some hope and some support as they continue to do their best to parent their child who lives with a brain-based difference and challenging behavioral symptoms. Thanks so much.